Do you own a kit greenhouse, or are you thinking about buying a kit greenhouse? Well, I did, and I loved it. In fact, on top of that, I figured out a pretty cool, pretty cheap way of keeping it heated. And I'll talk about that in like 2 seconds. But I should mention, I eventually decided to tear down that greenhouse and build a much bigger, much more ambitious geothermal greenhouse. Here's the story. I had a decent measure of success with that little kit greenhouse and the way that I heated it. And I should mention it was actually 2 kit greenhouses built back to back and then placed on top of a raised bed. Inside the raised bed were barrels of water with basic bucket heaters and thermostats, because thermal mass is the name of the game when keeping a greenhouse warm during the winter. I had many years of success with that kit greenhouse and heater combination. In fact, I was able to grow lettuce and kale months beyond what is normally possible in New England Zone 6B. And I should mention, if you're interested in building that system for your greenhouse, I included links in the description that lay out all the different things you would need to get in order to build that for yourself. But when the events of 2020 rolled around, like many of you, I realized I might need to rethink how well my garden produced. And so in the fall of 2021, I made the tough decision to take the old greenhouse down. Unfortunately, there was a major, heavy obstacle in the middle of me being able to do this project. You see, my property is solid rock. It's just big rocks with smaller rocks on top of it. I have to come up with creative ways of using these rocks just to dig one hole. So here was my challenge. The old greenhouse was long and narrow for a reason, because the only place I could put a greenhouse was a rock ledge that was long and narrow. I couldn't go too far this way, too much shade, the geography dropped off, and so it had to be this spot that I put my greenhouse. But now I wanted to put a footprint of a building that was considerably larger in that same location. And so began a month of solid jackhammering. Pretty early on, I realized I wanted to use geothermal to heat and cool the greenhouse. But remember all that rock? Yeah, the whole point of geothermal is you bury piping in the ground. And so that meant I had many hours, agonizing hours, of digging with a shovel, a pick, and a sledgehammer. And so I don't have a lot of pictures from that period of time because I was digging hours and hours on end with a shovel, a pick, and a sledgehammer. I'm okay. Needless to say, I had another problem, and that is I was running out of room to put stuff. I just didn't have a place to put the rocks. I didn't have a place to put the dirt. I was running out of a place to stand. And so that meant what I had to do was dig the geothermal hole in 2 sections. I dug the front part, and then buried the pipe, and then dug out the second half underneath it and used that dirt to cover the first part. Yeah, it was a nightmare. But once I had the hole dug, I could insulate it with 2-inch R6 insulation foam. And then I could install the 4-inch perforated pipe. It had a sleeve on it so that dirt wouldn't go through the perforations. And then at this point, the real work could start. If you've seen any of my other videos about how to keep a greenhouse warm, you know I talk a lot about thermal mass. And so when I was designing the greenhouse, I wanted to have a raised bed inside the greenhouse that was kind of a focal point of thermal mass that would collect the geothermal and solar heat coming into the structure. And it was around that time in December of 2021 that I discovered gabions. Now, if you aren't familiar with what a gabion is, more than likely you've probably already seen them. Most commonly, gabions are used along roadways to retain hillsides. And so it was a perfect scenario for me because I had a ton of rock that I needed to get rid of, as well as I wanted to have a raised bed that would serve as a collection point for all of that heat coming in to the greenhouse. And so for the latter half of December 2021, I set out to build the gabion basket bed inside the greenhouse. I also used the leftover wood from the previous greenhouse to build a shelf so that I could walk around on top of the bed. The next thing I did was cover the raised bed inside and out with 2 layers of heavy-duty weed barrier. After that, I spent a couple weeks pouring the concrete curb that was the footprint of the building so that I had something to bolt the structure to. And then I set about laying out the floor. I had leftover block from the old greenhouse that I used to make the floor area when you first enter into the greenhouse. And then what I did was I put down weed barrier, and then I put down 2 inches of R6 insulation, another layer of weed barrier, and then 3 inches gravel. Any guess where I got all the rocks from? Well, there you go. That's it for part 1. In part 2, I talk about the next heavy phase of construction, and that was milling the lumber and building the structure. Okay, there you have it. If you like this video, you might like these.